The night he chose to stand outside began with a sound so small it almost vanished beneath the wind, the soft knock of ice against the lantern glass. He did not move. He had learned long ago that survival favored stillness. Snow fell in thin, slanting lines, the kind that sliced at the face and filled the lungs with a clean, painful cold. Beyond the cabin door, the world lay quiet as a held breath, and he stood in that silence with his rifle balanced across his forearms, eyes fixed on the tree line. Inside, warmth gathered like a promise. Firelight crept through the chinks in the logs. A woman moved softly, careful not to wake the children. He could picture her without turning. Dark hair pinned tight, hands red from work, the faint crease between her brows that never quite smoothed anymore. She trusted him to keep the night at bay. That trust weighed more than the rifle. He had not always been a man who stood guard. Once he had ridden fast and loud, chasing pay and pride across open ground. Once the sound of gunfire had lifted his blood instead of chilling it. The winter took that man apart piece by piece. Lost does that. It strips away noise until only duty remains, plain as breath in the cold. The cabin crouched against the hillside like a stubborn animal, its roof bowed under snow. A single pine stood near the door, branches sagging, needles rimed white. He shifted his boots and felt the ache bloom up his legs. Pain was a companion now, familiar and honest. He welcomed it. Pain kept him awake. The wind changed. It came from the north, carrying the sharp smell of frozen sap, and something else beneath it, old leather, smoke, the ghost of horses. He lifted his chin, listening. The forest answered with nothing. Too much nothing. He thumbed the hammer back, slow and quiet, and let his breath fall into the dark. He thought of the road that had brought them here. The trading post 3 days, ride south. The men who watched too closely. The way conversation died when he entered. Winter closed the roads, but it did not close mouths, and word traveled on hunger and fear. He had felt it then, the pull of trouble tightening like a knot. A branch snapped. He froze, counting the space between heartbeats. Snow hissed. Another snap, closer this time. He slid 1 foot back, angling his body, making himself smaller. The lantern guttered, light flaring and dimming. In that flicker, he saw the tracks where there should have been none, a scuffed drift near the pine, the faintest line where snow had been pressed and lifted again. He did not shout. Shouts gave men something to shoot at. He let the quiet stretch, heavy and deliberate. If there were eyes in the trees, he wanted them to feel seen. His fingers tightened. The cold bit deeper. A shape moved at the edge of the light. Not a man. A shadow pretending to be one. It shifted back as the lantern steadied. He took 1 step forward, boot crunching. Another step answered him. Retreating, the forest swallowed it whole. He waited long after the sound was gone. Waiting was work. It wore the mind thin. At last, he eased the hammer down and rolled his shoulders. The ache spread, dull and steady. He glanced once at the door. The wreath hung crooked, tied there by small hands earlier that evening. He remembered their laughter, how it cut through the cold like a blade of sun. He would not let the night take that from them. Dawn came grudgingly, gray and flat. The snow had covered everything smooth, hiding the story of the night. He followed the ground anyway, reading what little it offered. A bent twig, a place where the crust had broken and been mended by wind. Someone had been there. Someone had chosen to leave. He ate standing, bread hard as wood, coffee bitter and thin. The woman watched him from the doorway, her eyes asking questions she did not voice. He shook his head once. Not yet. The children peered around her legs, solemn and small. He touched each of them, quick and gentle, then took the path toward the post. The trail narrowed between drifts. The sky pressed low. Halfway there, he heard the shots. They cracked the air, sharp and final. He ran, lungs burning, the world shrinking to sound and motion. Smoke hung over the post when he arrived. Men scattered. A body lay near the hitching rail, blood dark against the snow. He did not know the man well. That made it worse. The dead were heavier when they were almost strangers. He knelt, closed the staring eyes, and stood again as voices rose and fell around him. Accusations. Fear. Someone pointed north. By the time he turned back, the storm had teeth. Snow drove sideways, erasing the path. He reached the cabin at dusk, empty-handed and heavy. He barred the door, stoked the fire, and took his place outside again. The lantern glowed. The wind howled. He lifted his rifle and faced the dark, knowing the night would return, and with it the reckoning. He stood until his breath smoked and his thoughts settled into a narrow line. The frontier had taught him this lesson with cruel patience. Peace was never granted, only borrowed. Somewhere beyond the trees, men measured risk against hunger. Somewhere a choice was being made. He would answer it when it came, not with anger, though anger waited close, but with resolve sharpened by love. Inside the cabin, the fire cracked steady and alive. A child stirred, murmured, slept again. He listened until the sound faded, then turned back to the snow, to the long watch, to the truth he had accepted at last. A man could run from winter. He could bargain with it, or he could stand rooted and become the wall it broke against. This was the choice that would follow him, and the cost would be counted. Dawn brought no comfort. It only showed what the night had tried to hide. The cabin stood unchanged, but the world around it felt altered, as if some unseen hand had shifted the weight of things. He studied the snow again, slower now, more deliberate. Tracks had been erased, yet intention lingered. Men had come close. Men would come again. He did not speak of it as they ate. Silence had become their common language. The woman watched his face, reading what he would not say. She had learned that skill the hard way, over years of lean seasons and harder truths. When the children were sent to gather kindling, she touched his arm. "It won't end here," she said quietly. He nodded. Pretending otherwise would have been a lie too large to carry. By mid-morning he rode south, the horse laboring through drifts crusted like broken glass. The trading post rose from the white, like a scar, boards darkened by smoke and old blood. He smelled trouble before he saw it. Men clustered near the porch, voices sharp, eyes darting. Someone had died badly. That kind of death poisoned the air. He dismounted as a shout split the cold. A rifle cracked. Then another. Sound tore through him, familiar and unwelcome. He moved without thought, boots sliding, hand already lifting his weapon. A man stumbled from the doorway, clutching his side, red spreading through wool. He fell hard and did not rise. Everything after came in fragments. A scream, the smash of glass, a horse breaking loose. He fired once. Then again. Short, measured shots. He did not aim to kill, but the frontier did not always honor restraint. Smoke burned his eyes. The noise hollowed his chest. When it ended, the snow around the post looked trampled and obscene. One of the attackers lay dead near the barrels, face slack, surprise frozen there. Another fled north, bleeding, leaving a crooked trail behind him. The men who remained spoke in low, shaking voices. Someone said it was about supplies. Someone said it was revenge. No one said the dead man's name. He knelt beside the body by the rail. Young, too young to have earned this. He closed the eyes, felt the weight settle into his bones. This was the cost he had tried to outrun. Violence did not stay contained. It followed. They buried the dead before the light failed. There was no prayer, only the scrape of shovels and the hiss of wind. When he turned away, he knew he could not return by the road he had come. The north held danger, but the south held certainty. He chose the lesser unknown. The storm rose as if summoned by his decision. Snow thickened, swallowing landmarks, turning distance into guesswork. His horse slipped, went down hard, and did not rise again. He took what he could carry and left the animal where it lay, steam lifting from its nostrils like a final sigh. Alone now, truly. Night found him moving through timber, fingers numb, mind narrowed to breath and step. He fell once, then again. Each time he forced himself up. He thought of the cabin, of small hands tying ribbon, of firelight. He would not die here. A figure emerged from the white, sudden as a thrown stone. He raised his rifle. The other man did the same. They stood, guns leveled, snow piling on their shoulders. Recognition came slowly. The man's face was gaunt, beard rimed with ice, eyes bright with hunger and fear. An enemy once. A rival in another season. Not tonight. Lower it, the man said. His voice shook. We won't last alone. Trust was a risk. So was refusal. He lowered the barrel first. The other followed, relief breaking through his caution. They did not shake hands. They turned together into the trees, an alliance born of necessity. They shared a fire dug low, shielded from wind. Words came sparingly. The other man spoke of the attackers, of a group moving north, desperate and ruthless. Supplies thin, tempers thinner. He listened, fitting the pieces into the shape he already knew. They traveled at first light, skirting the river where ice groaned and shifted. Crossing meant death or deliverance. The ice cracked under his weight, water surging black and fast. He lunged, arm plunging into cold that burned like fire. The other man hauled him free. They lay, gasping, laughing once in disbelief, then moving on before the river could claim more. The forest offered one last trial. A shape moved between the trees, low and silent. A wolf, starved and bold. It rushed. There was no time for thought. He fired. The shot went wide. The animal struck, weight and teeth and fury. He felt pain bloom, sharp and hot. The other man drove his knife home. The wolf fell, twitching, breath steaming away. They bound the wound with shaking hands. Blood soaked through, dark and stubborn. He stood anyway. It ends tonight, he said, not as a promise but a fact. Somewhere ahead, men were making choices. So was he, and the frontier, indifferent and vast, waited to see which would endure. They moved on through the deepening dark, each step an argument against exhaustion. The wound throbbed in time with his pulse, but it grounded him, reminded him why he kept going. He thought of the woman's steady hands, of the way she met fear without flinching. He thought of the children sleeping, unaware how close the night had come to changing everything. Ahead, a glow flickered between trees, brief and telling. Firelight meant men, and men meant answers. He checked his rifle, felt the cold steel steady him, and stepped forward, knowing whatever waited would demand a reckoning he could no longer avoid. At last, he reached the edge of the clearing as the fire guttered low, its light pulsing like a wounded heart. Men sat close to it, shadows stitched to their boots, rifles leaned careless within reach. Hunger had sharpened them into something brittle and dangerous. He felt it the way one feels a coming storm, the pressure changing inside the skull. Beside him, the man he had chosen not to kill shifted his weight, wincing. Blood had soaked and dried, soaked again. They were both running on will. A voice carried across the snow, rough with authority. Plans were being made. A raid at first light. A cabin on a hillside. Warmth to be taken. He closed his eyes once, then opened them to the truth that settled like iron. He would not wait for dawn. Waiting was what had brought him to this edge. He stepped into the light. The fire snapped. Heads turned. A rifle came up. He fired first. Short, clean. The man with the rifle fell back, surprised more than hurt. Chaos followed. Shouts. Snow kicked up by boots. He moved with it, through it, letting the years guide his hands. He did not count shots. He counted breaths. The other man was there, too, limping but fierce, driving men off the fire with curses and steel. They fought back to back without words, a brief, brutal harmony. One attacker rushed him with a knife. He caught the wrist, twisted, felt bone give. He fired once into the dark and felt the night answer with silence. It ended as suddenly as it had begun. Two men fled. One lay still. The rest stood frozen, seeing not a victim but a wall. He held them there with his gaze. Go, he said. His voice carried. They went. He swayed. The wound burned hot and wet. The other man caught him. You'll make it, he said, though doubt threaded the words. They left the fire to die and turned north, toward the cabin, toward consequence. The walk took hours. The storm had spent itself, leaving a sky hard and bright with stars. Pain narrowed the world. He spoke when he had to, mostly to keep himself awake. Of the woman. Of the children. The other man listened, nodding, carrying him when his legs failed. At the edge of the trees, the cabin light showed, small and stubborn. He felt something loosen in his chest. He would not let her see him fall. He straightened every step a blade. The door opened before he knocked. Her eyes took in the blood, the stranger, the night clinging to them both. She did not cry out. She took his weight, guided him inside, spoke his name like an anchor. Warmth closed around him. The children slept on, breathing soft and sure. He sank onto a chair as she bound the wound with steady hands. The other man stood awkward, hat in hand. He met the man's eyes. Gratitude passed between them, heavy and brief. "Stay," he said, "until morning." The man nodded, relieved. He slept and did not dream. When he woke, dawn painted the snow gold. The cabin held. The world had not ended. He rose, stiff and alive, and went outside. The tracks told the rest. The men had gone south. The road would open again. Peace, borrowed but real, lay across the hillside. He stood where he had stood before, rifle resting easy, and felt the change settle. He was no longer running. He had chosen his ground and paid its price. Inside, the fire crackled. A child laughed, sudden and bright. He breathed in the cold and let it fill him. Winter would return. So would men. When they did, he would be ready, not as a ghost of what he had been, but as the man he had become, standing watch so others could sleep, and knowing now that this was not the end, only the beginning. He walked the perimeter, slow and deliberate, reading the land the way he always had, with respect earned by scars. Each print told a story of fear spent and hunger unanswered. He imagined the men who had fled, how the cold would work on them, how choices narrowed when daylight failed. He felt no triumph, only relief edged with resolve. Inside, she brewed coffee and spoke softly to the stranger, learning his name, his losses. He listened from the door, hearing in her voice the same steadiness that had carried them through worse seasons. When she met his eyes, there was worry there, yes, but also pride and something like understanding. She had known who he was when she chose him. She knew who he was now. The other man left after breakfast, shoulders straighter than when he arrived, a portion of supplies tied careful to his saddle. They shook hands, firm and final. "If our paths cross," the man said. "They will," he answered. The frontier was small that way. By noon the wound throbbed less. He split wood, slow, mindful, letting the work set him back into his body. Each swing was a promise kept. Each breath carried the smell of sap and smoke and home. He hung the lantern straight, adjusted the wreath. Small things mattered. They were what held when the big things broke. As evening fell, clouds gathered again. He felt no dread this time. He had measured the night and survived it. He took his place outside as the first flakes drifted down, familiar and clean. Inside, laughter rose and settled. He leaned the rifle against the post and rested his hands, steady. Whatever came next would find him here, awake, willing, and unafraid. The watch continued, and with it, the quiet vow that bound them all. Beyond the trees, the frontier breathed, vast and patient, testing hearts and hands alike, and he met its gaze without flinching, knowing tomorrow would demand more, and trusting he could answer again when winter returned with fresh trials.